the moment you display any sort of emotion, it seems like a technical foul is going to be called.
Oh, this drives me nuts too much. Go off. I get so irritated with this.
You dunk, you can't even stare at the person who you've just posterized. How can you call that a technical foul? Like,
I actually think 80% of the taunting fouls are BS.
But I also think players talk too much with the refs.
There's too much complaining about every call.
Get on with the game.
Oh, you know what, Muzz? I'm an absolute moron. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of All About Sports, the podcast. Before we get into this week's episode, a quick reminder of last week's episode. We talked about the future of cricket captaincy. We specifically zoned in on Indian captaincy. So looking ahead to after Rohit Sharma, who would be captain, some of the candidates who we think would be key figures in making that decision and would be, some of the people who would be brought into that captaincy role potentially. We also looked at a couple of other countries. We spoke about Australia, England, and Pakistan as well. So check that out. It was a reasonably broad look into sort of captaincy future in cricket. This week, it's myself, Rishabh, and co-host Mazhar. What's up, Maz?
All good, Krishnan. Always fun. And I think you need to remind people when it's both of us, everyone should know what the topic is going to be typically.
Exactly. As I've said it whenever I think we both said this whenever it's the two of us. Usually when it's just Maz and I, it's classic basketball podcast. It's an NBA podcast. As Maz and I said kind of in the start and prep for this call, it might be a little bit of a venting session. So if you've been upset about anything, do listen to this podcast. You're going to like this one. Specifically, we're going to be talking a little bit about the refereeing and foul calling in this NBA playoffs. It's been a great playoffs. We've both gotten to watch a lot of the games. But one of the things that we both have a massive gripe with is some of the foul calling. And it's becoming, in my opinion, pretty frustrating to watch basketball because the game stops so much because of so much foul calling, going to the video. It's infuriating. But there's a lot to talk about. There are probably a couple of buckets that come to mind specific to foul calling. Let's start off with the technical fouls, right? One of the things that we're seeing a lot in this NBA is a lot of technical fouls. And some of them I understand the logic for. Some of them are like aggressive, they're dangerous. But there's some really stupid ones. And I know a specific one that you've called out in the past that bothers you. Talk to me a little bit about the technical foul calling in the NBA in general and any calls that specifically bother you when they're made, especially if it's a technical foul call.
Technical fouls, I think, are the one thing that has really, apart from the timeouts, I think technical fouls have been the most frustrating part of watching the NBA. When I watch some of these technical fouls that are called on players and coaches, and sometimes not even the player who's involved in the play gets a technical foul called when he's doing something else on the side out of banter or just trash talking, which is all part and parcel of the game. I think that's what makes it fun and what makes it interesting. It's not even like in the beginning, I used to think they were inconsistent with the calls, which I can accept and live with because some referees might just not be as soft in terms of their mindset or might just not feel so equally about certain talk, like players talking and stuff. I still feel that there is inconsistency. I think obviously the superstars do get away with a lot. LeBron keeps talking. He doesn't seem to get technical fouls called on him. But people like Joel Embiid, just because he has a bad rep, and Draymond Green, just because they have a bad rep, they can't say anything at this point. In fact, it's so funny that sometimes that even players, when they do this and just turn around, they get technical calls for that as well. So for those who are listening, I just basically put my finger on my mouth saying zip it basically and walking away without emotions, right? Because you can't, the moment you display any sort of emotion, it seems like a technical foul is going to be called. The worst one, Krishnan, out of all these technical fouls is the one after a dunk.
Oh, this drives me nuts too much. Go off. I get so irritated with this.
Hanging on the rim, I get it because that's hazardous. And also, if you break the board, it's going to take ages to replace it. So that's fair enough. I get that.
Thank
It's
you,
more
Shaq, for making this
yeah,
a
thank
thing.
you, Shaq, for making that a thing, because more than showboating, now I think it's more about just like a hazard sort of incident.
Yeah.
But you dunk, you can't even stare at the person who you've just posterized. Fine, that's also fine. Even if you stare at them in general, it's like, yeah, come on, man. Like, how can you call that a technical foul? Like, so you can't. So basically, what you want the game to be played like Kawhi Leonard throughout. It like just think about it. That would get so dry and beige that I wouldn't watch it at all. It's like watching the NBA on mute. That's what it would become like. Without the NBA is what it is because of commentary, because of the emotions displayed on court, because of the constant banter between fans and players, because of all those factors. You take it away by calling stupid technical fouls. And the worst part, Krishnan, is technical fouls also stall the game, not only because of the foul, because then there's free throws. There's one free throw and then possession. That also takes time because he'll take the free throw. They're all dilly-dallying. Some guys doing some fancy circus shot in the meanwhile before they actually go and start the possession at the sideline again. Constant nonsense. It's just so endless. I'm going to let you go off now on this. But yeah, I think the ones after the dunks when they are called just for a stare down or just like literally, like there was one, I can't remember who it was because obviously it happens so often that it's almost everyone now. But I clearly remember it was one incident where I think it was Morant. He dunked the ball. The player was on the ground of the other team. Morant, to avoid stepping on him, basically just walked over him, like to make sure that he doesn't land on him. And they thought that that was being condescending and they called a technical on him. I didn't see anything in that. Like, I just don't get it. It's probably worse than the VAR rule in football for me.
I think so much. And I think, VAR, obviously there are still lots of issues with VAR, but I generally think it's more executional. Like there's some things that like referees are just messing up, for example. Like the rule is reasonably clear enough to make a decision and referees are just making the wrong call. Whereas in the case of the NBA, what I'm nervous about is the guidance that referees are getting is that, no, that is a foul. Like call that a technical. That is the right thing to do. And it's so frustrating because I think, so to give some context, I think the reason those rules exist for taunting and it's taunting, it's a taunting foul basically that you get, existed because of, historic issues the NBA has had with fightings and fights breaking out, right? I mean, obviously the most famous one being the Malice at the Palace. But I think there has to be a little bit of awareness on I think NBA is in a slightly different place. Now, that's not to say like a fight can't break out. Fights will break out. It's an aggressive sport. But I do think aggression is in a slightly different place in the NBA than it was in the 1990s as well as the early 2000s, right? I mean, we've heard like the Gilbert Arenas story of, I think someone brought a gun to the locker room. I think we're slightly removed from that, where hopefully that's not the case. So that's one. Point number two is there's a degree to taunting, right? Like I understand if a guy is like shoves a guy after he dunks on him. I also understand if he like literally intentionally lands on a guy. But just talking a little bit of shit, that is so harmless. And it's unbelievable that that the guidance to referees is that, no, you want to avoid any kind of conflict. Like there will be tension. Like, and it's not even tension, it's more just a release. Like it's natural. You take a shot, you talk a little bit of shit. That's it. And I don't think, rather than deflating the situation, in my opinion, a lot of times it adds heat because now the player's pissed. Now that he's got a technical, he's irritated, he's upset. It just adds fuel to the fire. I don't think it helps anything. It slows down the game. And you're right, Maz. I actually think 80% of the taunting fouls are BS. I think maybe 20% are justifiable. There's some shove or something like genuinely aggressive done. 80% are complete BS. The other thing that bothers me is when there's any kind of shit talking between players. Like, Patrick Beverley's a guy who just likes talking a lot of crap, right? He will just find a way to talk shit the whole game and people will be talking to each other. Russell Westbrook's also a guy who likes to talk shit. I can't stand when referees in that situation just give a double tech. This really annoying thing where they just go like, yeah, both people were kind of annoying. Like, they just give a double tech. It's extremely infuriating. And what people don't realize is players like Patrick Beverley manipulate that situation. Because if they see someone who has one tech already, they don't have a tech, they're willing to risk getting a tech by just annoying them. There was an incident that happened in the Memphis series. I can't remember who Patrick Beverley did it to, but he purposely like locked hands with the player because that guy had one tech and he knew like, oh, if I get a tech, that's fine. If he gets a second tech, he's out. And it's kind of a cop out to just blame both people. But I couldn't agree more with you, Maz, on some of the technical foul calling, especially for taunting. I want to move on to another kind of foul, which is the flagrant foul. Now, these are obviously the slightly more intense ones. A flagrant 2 foul is a direct ejection. A flagrant 1 foul is not a direct ejection, but if you get two flagrant ones, you essentially get ejected. So it's sort of like a yellow card in football in many ways. Muzz, we have to talk about basically the reason this is coming to light in this playoffs, which is Draymond Green and Dillon Brooks. Draymond Green in game one of the Memphis Golden State Warriors series, he does definitely like hook onto Jaren Jackson Jr.'s shirt. Jaren Jackson falls to the ground. I think it's undeniable it was dangerous play. I think the debate was just between flagrant 1 and flagrant 2. Dillon Brooks takes a wind up in game 2, hits Gary Payton Gary Payton II's head as he's going up. And as he's falling, Gary Payton Jr. tries to land on his wrist, breaks his wrist. He's out for the playoffs. A horrible injury. And if you watched it, you instantly felt extremely sorry. Even Dillon Brooks didn't even argue the call. He immediately realized what he did. Must talk about those two, but specifically, I think the more contentious one, Draymond Green. Do you think there was a flagrant 2? And then secondly, do you think the 1-game suspension that Dillon Brooks got, in addition to being ejected, was appropriate?
I gave the Draymond Green one a lot of thought, Krishna. I watched it on repeat because at first, in real time, it looked like a flagrant 1. But when I saw it again and again and again, I couldn't help but think that was very dangerous and that warranted a flagrant 2. Because yes, he fouled him hard. It was an unnecessary foul, but what was scary was the fact that he held him to avoid him from falling, and that was even riskier. As much as Draymond must have thought that he's probably doing something to save him and to protect him, it wasn't the case because he's breaking his momentum at that point. It's potentially better for him to have fallen on the ground. Over there, when you hold him like that, he lands badly, he lands wrong. There's a chance that he twists his ankle or gets his ACL torn. So I think just thinking about it logically, right? Any break in momentum like that is extremely dangerous. And I think Draymond realized, I'm not going to say it was intentional by Draymond. I think it wasn't. That's why he stuck his hand out to hold him. Because I think the moment he smashed him the moment he hit him, I think that was the time when Draymond's like, oh my God, this is a bad one. So he reacted instinctively. But that doesn't mean that wasn't a flagrant 2 because it was an extremely dangerous play. And as much as I know Draymond is a physical player and a massive hustler, he's not as dirty as some players in the league. In terms of, like, I don't think he has the malice that we see with some players. Yes, he's highly competitive. Yes, he has a temper. But I wouldn't necessarily say he's a Grayson Allen, for example. So that's why I think flagrant 2 for sure. But I can live with that foul. I just didn't like how the Warriors were protecting him. And I didn't like that Steph came and was complaining about the calls. Well, the Warriors make this a habit. Steve Kerr is the first one. Honestly, love the guy, but he's always whining about fouls and always playing the victim card for his team. And he's a whinge merchant, much like Jurgen Klopp is with Liverpool. Just certain factors like those really trigger me. Coming to the Dillon Brooks one, man, that was nasty. He's luck. Like I know he realized and that what he did, but I just feel that the series has been way too aggressive and physical that it's turning ugly. Ja Morant got hit badly on his eye as well. I think everyone's overlooking that. But I think they both teams need to sit down and calm down a bit. I get it, it's the playoffs. I get it's meant to be competitive, but that doesn't mean do anything to win at this point. Like there needs to be uphold something at least. Like because at the end of the day, it could be your last game, it could be the other person's last game potentially. So I think just be a bit mindful of that. And there are ways to do it, and these guys are way too good to know where to draw the line. Because even when I watched the Bucks and the Celtics, the one where Tatum managed to just get the dunk on the breakaway, Giannis came running back, went for the block, missed it. But there was no sort of malice in that. You could tell Giannis was going for the ball. The moment Giannis missed the block, there was no follow through. He didn't go for Tatum. He didn't get frustrated. Yes, Giannis is different altogether. But what I'm saying is there are ways to do this, and they all know it. So you can be competitive, you can play hard, you can foul as well if push comes to shove. But you know how to make those hard fouls without risking that player too. They've done it way too many times, according to me, to be making such mistakes. Because it's not a mistake to me. It's just after a point, it's the anger, frustration, adrenaline, everything coming together and creating this demonic sort of mindset that just really scares me. So I've hated the Warriors and Grizzlies series simply because it's just foul after foul and it's overtly aggressive. I'm just always worried about it. People are reaching in for no reason. Like Poole is reaching in, he's trying to be like, just because he's had a lot of amazing games and he's been doing brilliantly, he's getting carried away with the way he's going at Ja Morant at times. Draymond just plays the same way, so I'm not going to critique him. I just feel Memphis all around especially have been way too aggressive, and I think they need to dial it down a bit. Maybe concentrate more on the basketball and less on the physicality. They'll probably even play better and maybe even get a better result. Because when I watch Dallas play as well, yes, Doncic is always whining and he doesn't get certain calls. Yes, I mean, Chris Paul is one of the less said the better, like a great offensive player, but he's always flailing, and he's always trying to draw offensive fouls. He's always exaggerating things. All that is still fine. Simulation and gamesmanship I can live with. Playing so dirty in a game where that holds such high regard and integrity, I've not seen it in a long, long time. I think this is the first time we've seen it in our sort of generation.
Yep.
Fights, yes, fights have always been there, but like a series like this is actually the first one and the only one I can think of.
And you're right, Mas. The difference is it's every single game. It's not like one or two incidents. It's been every single game is excessively aggressive. And I love the point you made, which is I think is the perfect counter to it, which is the Bucks Celtics. The Bucks Celtics is a very, very defensively focused game. They're playing very tight defense, but there's a sense of like understanding, right? Like Grant Williams and Al Horford are guarding Giannis. There's always like just a gamesmanship. There's an understanding like, yes, we're going to be tough on you. We're going to be tough. But at the end of like, even after a couple of plays, they're going up and being like, hey, I didn't mean that. Like there was literally an incident with Grant Williams fouled Giannis, took him to the ground. Immediately, Grant Williams like goes to Giannis like, hey, man, I didn't mean that. Giannis is like, okay. It's also, I just think another matter that Giannis is just unbelievably durable. Like, I really hope he doesn't get injured. I don't want to jinx it, but he's incredibly durable. I do want to come to a few of the points that you called out, Mazhar. I'll start off with the Draymond Green foul. I do actually think I'm very torn. I'm literally torn between a flagrant one or two. The only reason I say flagrant one is I'm kind of the belief, like kind of like in cricket, if you don't know if the batsman's in or out, you give it in favor of the batsman. In cases like that, I want to go to keep the player in so that we don't have to lose a player to a game, which is the only reason why I say flagrant one. Having said that, it was really dangerous. And also, I made a mistake. The foul was on Brandon Clark, not on Jaren Jackson Jr. But you're right. Very dangerous play. Pulls at his shirt and takes him down. I want to speak to the second point you spoke about because it drives me nuts as well. Is Steve Kerr's a phenomenal coach, but in the post match, he has this, and I don't as much think the Warriors players are as bad, but Steve Kerr specifically, and I've noticed this a few times, has this very holier than thou attitude when he talks about, and to make the argument that like, oh, Draymond was completely innocent and Dillon Brooks is this devil is completely unfair, because I think we need to realize we have to disassociate the result, the end outcome, from the foul itself. Let's be honest, the reason Gary Payton 2 broke his hand is because he went and like he's trying to break his fall with his hand. If Brandon Clark does the same thing, there's a very good chance he also breaks his hand, right? It just happens that he didn't do that and so didn't break his hand. I think a lot of people are forgetting that, right? So for example, would they be as mad, as upset if Gary Payton didn't put his hand behind, gets like a bad injury, but it's not like this kind of a fall? Maybe not. I definitely do agree. Dillon Brooks's foul was worse. I do agree with that, and that was definitely a flagrant 2. I agree with the one match ban as well. But it really upsets me when like Steve Kerr pulls out this like there's a code of conduct in the NBA, and he's right. But in my opinion, Draymond Green also violated that code of conduct. Brandon Clark was going up for a dunk and he pulled him, maybe not intentional, maybe whatever. He went for a shot that pulled down his jersey and he broke him in the fall, and catching him didn't help. I'm not saying it's intentional. I honestly don't think Dillon Brooks intended it to be as violent as it ended up being. Like Dillon Brooks wanted to stop the play. He didn't intend it to be as violent as it was, and it happened. So it really pisses me off when Steve Kerr, in my opinion, specifically places this holier than thou attitude. He's an amazing coach. I actually think he's an amazing person as well. I think he speaks very beautifully on a lot of issues, but just this one thing really drives me nuts as well. And I completely agree with your point on this series is getting way too physical. It's completely out of hand. They have to both teams have to calm it down. I don't think anything the refs do is going to help, because every foul they give is like getting everyone more upset. But both teams have to just take it easy and really, really calm things down, because we're going to just get way too many injuries and it's going to get annoying. Ja Morant already had to leave yesterday's game, the game 3 of the game of the series. So it's really annoying. But the last one I want to cover, and then I have like a few fun questions for you. But last one I want to cover actually is specifically one that I was thinking about as we were having this conversation. Fouls that referees call that are considered disrespectful to the referee. I think we're seeing a lot of those texts, not as much in this playoffs, but we saw them a lot in the regular season, where like a player throws a ball kind of hard at the referee, or a player's like talking to the referee for a long time about a decision, and a referee immediately gives a tech. Now, this exists in a lot of sports, right? This exists in football as well. If you harass the referee for a certain amount of time, you get a yellow card. Although I do think football actually does it better. Like, you have to really talk a lot to the referee to get a yellow in football. I think referees in the NBA have been a little bit soft on this rule, and it's been decent in the playoffs, thank God. But in the regular season, there have been so many instances of like, I remember, I think Chris Paul once handed a ball back that seemed aggressive and got a tech. There are others where people are just talking to the ref, and the ref after a certain time is just like, nope, immediately will go for a technical. Muz, I know this isn't a clear-cut rule, but there has to be there has to be a slightly higher threshold, right, for this kind of stuff, because it's kind of annoying. Fortunately, not been an issue in the playoffs, but I don't know, Muzz, what are your thoughts on that one?
It's. I mean, there was one. I remember someone was just giving the ball back to the ref, and then it hit him in the face or something, and then he
Yeah.
got a technical. And he's like, "Bro, I just passed you the ball. You weren't looking." And he actually, I can't remember who it was, but I was in splits because I was watching that game live, and I just couldn't believe my eyes that he got a technical for it. And even he was laughing after that. And
I remember this
but
incident. I don't remember the player either, but I know what you're
yeah,
talking
I
about.
can't remember the player as well. But but I think Krishnan, it ties into the same thing. I feel like all the decisions have just become so soft, right? So like they've maintained that sort of consistency where if they are giving text for just talking or staring down someone and saying something to the ref is definitely way worse. So I guess I'm going by that. It's definitely very soft. Most of them should never be text. But I also think players talk too much with the refs. Get on with the game. Like that's the thing. LeBron never stops talking to the refs. Luca never stops talking to the refs. Who else? I'm trying to think. Jokic never talks, but when he does, he just yells at them, so he's bound to get attacked. Jokic scares me at times. I feel like Jokic will actually go and punch them at one point in time. Like he's really agitated and aggressive. But one thing I will tell you, Jokic, when he is angry, he's always been right about fighting for those calls. He's never been wrong. So it's justified when he's been angry at the refs for a no call or for any sort of reason. So I would say that. But yeah, man, it really, really needs to change. But I can't even fall there because they are non-stop. The NBA players are non-stop. They're always chirping away in the air. It's enough that they have to deal with anyway. The coaches are always swearing at them as well. The crowd doesn't help. Over that, these stringent guidelines that they have to follow for rules, I think all of this adds to their pressure. So I'm going to sort of empathize with them for the ref calls when there's some sort of disrespect towards the refs. But I think the NBA just needs to change the rules and open it up a bit more and be a bit more liberal in terms of giving players some sort of freedom. I'm not saying give them full freedom where they can pretty much do whatever, but the text need to come down. I think for me, it's that. It's just that you can't have this, like, everything needs to be subjective and dependent on each and every situation. I think that's the key. Having this sort of rule book to follow does not work.
And that's actually a fair point, Muzz. I do agree that there've been the odd instance where they've gotten it wrong, but you made a good point, and I'm kind of coming over to your side of thinking, which is players are talking way too much. You're exactly right. Players are talking way too much to the refs. There's too much complaining and complaining and complaining and complaining about every call. Every 2 minutes, this sign is being done to review a decision. There is too much whining and whinging about every. And you're right. Luca and LeBron, especially, were two specific callouts. I mean, we're seeing Luca in the playoffs, so I see it a lot more often. But after every single call, like there are three guys running up to the referee and like saying this happened, this happened. Like, guys, just keep the game going. It's very frustrating. So you're right. I can kind of empathize with the referees that they have to find a way to deter this kind of behavior. And I guess if this is the deterrent, this is the only way to do it. I did want to quickly call out because there's an area I think you can help speak to a little bit that I can't speak to as well. The area that I'm personally confused about is a charge versus a block in basketball, right? There's so many times where an offensive player is running into a guy takes a hit, and I feel like it's literally a 50. It's always just like a coin toss, honestly, every single time, unless the guy is like 100% was completely planted. The defensive player was completely planted. I could literally flip a coin and like I cannot guess which way it's gonna go. I am always confused about it. But Muzz, can you guide us a little bit on what's the right call? And is there some cases where like it's just nothing? It's just like half good defense, good offense, like just keep the play going. Like just because someone falls, I don't necessarily think means there's anything wrong. But I want to get your thoughts on it, Maz.
It's always been a tricky one and a tough one. Some players just know how to get charges called, like Chris Paul, but also Chris Paul, I feel, has a lot of the refs in his pocket. But like Pat Bev, he's good at getting charges called. Caruso. What I've noticed is there is definitely a technique, and when you watch it on the replay more often than not, you'll understand where there is a slight difference. So it's not about just about planting of your feet. It's more so about the position of your body. So when you are a defender, you have to basically be mirroring the player. So what happens is you can't just have one shoulder. Like you can be stationary, but if you have just one shoulder and blocking that player's path, that's basically blocking them. Because what's happening is he's trying to go from, let's say he's dribbling from the right and you've positioned your body. So he runs into your left shoulder. So that's essentially you have blocked his path from driving. But if you have planted your entire body in that position where he runs straight into you, where it's so you are the person with the primary position at that point in time, then it's an offensive foul. So it's a very thin line and it's very hard to call. That's why it's like you feel like it's a flip of the coin a lot of times. But it's actually more than that. And I agree, it's very hard to get right. And I think the refs do a pretty good job in terms of calling charges most of the time. Because when I've noticed them on the replay, they are typically good calls and right calls. But I must say, there's definitely a bias with certain players. I think this it's the typical small guards who will get the calls simply because of size and strength. Jokic doesn't get, I mean, Jokic gets charged at a lot of times and gets called for blocking fouls. It's happened to Cat a few times as well. I've seen Kyrie not getting some calls as well. I've seen a lot of players do not get calls if they are slightly on the broader side. It's harder for them, but again comes down to your positioning. So essentially, what it means is if the player is dribbling and he's cutting across, whichever side it may be, you need to already be there as a defender. You can't slip in between and plant your feet and cut across because he's already on his way. So that's why it's a blocking foul. So literally using the blocking in the dictionary way, if possible, is what you end up doing. So you are impeding his movement rather than being there and being like this sort of, I don't know, like literally a wall in the way where you're like, you shall not pass. So that's when you get the charge call. So it's slightly different. So for me personally, I get where you are coming from, and a lot of times they will make wrong decisions. But that's something that I'm not so worried about in terms of the game.
So here's my plus and minus. I think I'll start with the negative. On the negative side, I do think there's a strange tendency to think that a foul has to be called if someone falls to the ground. And I want to move away. I want refs or teams or whatever it is, the NBA organization to move away from that thinking. Because I think that a lot of times when just good defense is being played and the offensive player doesn't score, or sometimes the offensive player gets ahead of the defensive player and somehow in some touch, the offensive player just kind of falls. And so just because someone falls to the ground, I don't think necessarily means there's a foul, and there isn't a need to call a foul. On the flip side, I actually think they've become slightly better about the charge and block rule, because if you remember, earlier there used to be a lot more incidents, at least 2 seasons back, or maybe even one season back, where players would literally just pop out right at the end as a player's about to make a layup, get hit, and refs would give that a foul on the offensive player. And so now they become a little bit more smart about that, where like a guy can't just like suddenly walk in the middle, literally with the entire plan of getting hit and just get that foul. So I'm liking that they've gotten smarter about that. They have gotten better about the rule. And you're right, in terms of, is it my top priority to solve? No, I don't. And you're right. I don't think they necessarily, I honestly don't even, I can't even say they get it wrong because I don't even know if it's right or wrong. So like I can't even say like the other ones that we spoke about, like I can slightly have an opinion on that. Yes, that's right. Yes, that's wrong. This one, though, I myself am not that confident, so I can't really say much. But I do think they've gotten smarter about it for sure.
Krishna, just a word of advice. Listen to what the commentators have to say about the charging decisions. They'll tell you if it's right or wrong, and that's how you then slowly build up and understand how it works, and then it's typically right. So that's how I learned it.
That's a very good call out. Okay, Maz, I think we've had a good therapeutic session. Got a little bit of our frustrations out. I think we've gotten.
I think I went on a 10-minute venting session in between, Krishna.
Yeah, I know. I think we both needed that release. Maybe the Warriors and Memphis also need a similar release. Maybe we can bring some of them on the podcast to chill out before game 4. But with that, Maz, I had a couple of questions I wanted to hit you with. I'm going to give you I'll give you a few hints in between. They're very tough and they're all specific to foul calling. So there are only a couple that I have, but I'm going to ask you the first question, which is which is the player that averages the most personal fouls in this season per game? So per game, I believe it's for the entire season and includes the playoffs. I'll give you 2 hints. It's a center and it is a team that was in the play-in tournament. I won't tell you if they won or lost in the play-in tournament. They were in the play-in tournament and it's a center.
Okay, it's a center. And they were in the play-in tournament.
Play-in tournament, yes.
Oh, God. Now that's a bit tricky. Sure.
It's a tough one. Let me give you another hint. I think what's another good hint? I'll give you another hint. Western Conference on a big trash.
No, because
talking.
I'm thinking of all the centers. No, that's why. No, I knew it was definitely Western Conference. I was just thinking of which were the teams in the play-in for a minute. So that's why. So
Minnesota, Clippers,
Spurs,
Pelicans.
Was it Cat?
It was Cat. So the only reason it was Cat averaged 3.68 fouls, which is pretty horrendous. Especially given he's
terrible.
And pretty close to him was Jaren Jackson was third with 3.62. So kind of goes to explain why that series had so many fouls. And if you remember that series, there were lots of games where Jaren Jackson Jr. and Karl Anthony Towns actually either fouled out or were in foul trouble. So that's the only reason why I wasn't as surprised.
I just remember, I think the last 2 games or 3 games of the regular season, I remember Cat had a lot of fouls. I think he fouled out also in one of them, and then he had 5 fouls in the next one or something like that. So I'm surprised though. I am surprised by that.
I'm a little bit surprised because I don't think, I don't think he's a very physical defender, but I also don't think he's a very smart defender. Like I feel like he makes a lot of like stupid fouls, like unnecessary fouls that like get him in trouble. But anyway, Cat was number 1. For our listeners, Jae'Sean Tate was second with 3.67, Jaren Jackson third, Yusuf Nurkic fourth, and Pascal Siakam fifth. Interesting one. But last question for you, Maz. I keep this pretty short. Last question for you. Same question, but with the team. So which team averaged the most number of fouls in the 2021-2022 season? I don't know if the stat I have is only for the year 2021. I think it's for both 2020, like through 2022, like to current date. I'll give you a hint. It's an Eastern Conference team. They were also in the play-in tournament.
I was going to go with that Eastern Conference team itself, but I was going to go with the Boston Celtics, to be honest. So that doesn't work now because you said it's a play-in team. That really changes a lot. The Raptors.
Cleveland, interestingly. Cleveland with 17.1 fouls, 17.5 fouls in the season. So interestingly, oh, you know what, Maz? I am a absolute moron. I was looking at the list the wrong way. Cleveland was actually the lowest.
Yeah, because I was going to say 17 sounds low.
Sorry. The highest is a Western Conference team, also in the play-in tournament.
Oh, God. I'm going to go with the Grizzlies.
Nope, Minnesota. I think Minnesota have carried that. They've got the infamous record for both the individual player with the most fouls as well as the team with the most fouls. 22.2, followed by Detroit 21.9, and then Golden State 21.2. So pretty high fouling team.
And still, Steve Kerr thinks they are the angelic team in the league.
Exactly. I mean, this, oh my God, I don't want to spend another 10 minutes going off on that. So
I think we're going to do one on Golden State Warriors at the end of this season.
Hopefully we can get Steve Kerr on to defend himself. Let's see. Let's try and reach out and see what he has to say. But Maz, thanks so much. Thanks so much to all our viewers and listeners for checking out this episode. Do leave a like if you enjoyed this episode and share it with anyone else who might like a similar episode. Leave your comments on any other player or play that bothered you this season. Any player you think gets away with certain fouls or you think doesn't get enough fouls, either part of that equation. If you do feel interested in, covering any sport that you're interested in, that's something unique, something new, do reach out to us. We're always trying to learn more about new sports, and we're always trying to learn something new and share something new through this podcast. So reach out to us through any of our social media platforms. But with that, we'll catch you next week with another episode. Stay safe and have a great week. If you like this episode, make sure to leave a like and share it with anyone else who might be interested. You can also subscribe on any social media platform that you prefer, and all our links are in the bio. We also have a website with all our episodes as well as blogs and a whole lot of other sports content, so make sure to check that out as well.